Hi, everyone. Pastor Galen, lead pastor at Cheyenne Hills Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We hope that these podcasts will be a real encouragement to you on your spiritual journey. You can also connect with Cheyenne Hills at CheyenneHills.org. Hope you enjoy the program.
We are across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast that's actually a video podcast in the studio. We have with us Nathan Winters, as you all know him now from, I guess we've done this several times, but the lady behind the glass now is right here.
There's no glass.
You let me out, so
we
thanks.
let her behind the glass. And Julie Fogg. So thank you for joining us, Julie. And there's a special reason today that I really wanted us all to be able to talk, because we all got to experience something this week that I think it was unique in our town. Mm-hmm. And I so appreciate you being a part of it, inviting us that we could be a part. And I'll just have to tell you, I didn't realize, I knew the story of this guy after we got into it. It's like, oh my gosh, now I know who this is. Mm-hmm. But when you invited and you said the guy's name, I just thought, Andrew Brunson. It's like, I didn't register. And when he got into his story, I was oh my gosh.
Powerful.
The powerful story behind this guy. So Andrew Brunson was in prison in Turkey.
Izmir, Turkey.
Izmir, Turkey. Mm-hmm. And when we toured Turkey, the churches of Asia Minor, James, Davey, and I with Subash, and we went to all those churches. Izmir is where we stayed for like 4 days.
It's amazing.
Izmir is a beautiful city.
Yeah.
Beautiful streets, palm trees right on the Mediterranean. It's just, the food's fantastic, and the people are wonderful. And then you find out he had a church there,
right?
And he was in prison. So tell us a little bit of the background and story of Andrew Brunson.
Right. Andrew Brunson had been a missionary at the time that you visited, and about the time also that he was thrown into jail. He had been a missionary for 23 years there.
Yeah.
And had a little church. He had helped start churches all over the nation of Turkey. But he happened to be in Izmir at that time, and there was a coup attempt against the president of Turkey, who has developed a very bad reputation as opposed to any sort of religious freedom, anything outside of the very heavy Islamic tendencies that the Ottomans were known for 100 years before, to the point where now one of the great heroes of Turkey, Ataturk, Kemal Ataturk, has now been kind of attacked in their media in the way that some people are attacking even the founders of our own country. They're doing that in Turkey. But there was a big coup attempt against...
I remember that.
Yeah, right.
In like 2015, somewhere in there?
Somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah,
right.
I remember that.
2015, 16.
Because the guy that was behind it, I think, lives in the States, like in Philadelphia or something like that,
so.
right? And he was trying to overtake Erdogan, who's the sitting president or prime minister, whatever they call it.
That's exactly right. It's actually a very large movement that actually goes across many different borders. And it's called the Gulenist movement. They have a lot of schools that they work through as well in many different countries. Okay. But the Gulenist movement, it sounds like, was the one that was pushing that the most. But he was one of the many people that was taken in on that. And he was charged with terrorism. His wife, actually, Noreen, I believe it is, was taken in. She was only held 13 days, but still, I couldn't imagine, in a Turkish jail for 13 days. And he was told, he was charged with several crimes, but the primary one being aiding and abetting terrorism. Wow. And the sentence for that would have been 3 life sentences plus 35 years. He would have lived out the rest of his life in a Turkish prison. Yeah. And
that's what he knew he was facing.
Right.
And he said that, it's like, he kind of jokingly said that, they put on 35 years for good measure just to make sure.
Right.
But not only just in a Turkish prison, but in a Turkish prison, the way I understand it, in solitary. Mm-hmm. Is that how you understood that?
Well, so it went through a couple stages. The first stage, actually, he was in a prison where he was the lone Christian, packed in with a bunch of Muslims. And he said it was very difficult. He never felt more alone than he was in that moment. Wow. And there was no one that he could have fellowship with. And his point in that was how important it is for Christians to get together and to go to church, and how when you don't have that opportunity, what it means, what it feels like.
Soul just dries up, didn't it? Yeah. I want to get into more of his application and story, and I want to hear from. But let's get his face up here on the screen so that people can see who we're talking about. And the way I understand it, so in 2018, President Trump basically put a sanction on Turkey.
Right.
And Erdogan, after, I don't know, just a few months, I think you said from August to September or something like that.
To October. Yeah,
to October. Their economy crashed, or inflation hit hard.
Right. So the details are this. On August the 9th, President Trump placed massive tariffs on Turkish goods into the United States.
Gotcha, tariffs, okay.
And so what Erdogan tried to do was place tariffs on shipping Turkish goods into America. Of course, it didn't work out the way that he wanted it to. And they suffered the biggest inflation that they had suffered
During
since
that time.
2003. Wow. Right. And so it was shortly after that they thought, okay, thankfully we need to get this guy out of here. But I'm thankful actually in that circumstance for a president who, for doing something right, would be willing to risk such a thing.
Oh my gosh, for one guy.
Right.
Absolutely. That was so moving, and I think spoke volumes to anybody that's overseas to think that he would send an entourage. And then the way I understand it, the way Erdogan, we rattled the sword. He was afraid of actually more retribution.
Right.
And there was a guy. Do you remember the guy that was actually flown over there?
I don't.
I've heard the name. He was the guy that was with Jack Hibbs.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember?
I don't.
We were talking about him. And so anyway, he was the guy that went over there from the Trump administration, got him out. And as soon as they got him, and he said I think there was a picture of they pushed him out and they got him on a plane, got him out of there. Yeah. And then he got to actually, is that the photo? It's probably a picture of him leaving. He looks a little happier than sad right there. And then he came home and of course Trump, had some things to say about him, but he got to pray over President Trump in the Oval Office. And I remember these images too. There's a great image right there. And it's just
what a blessing.
What a powerful. And so Andrew was here in Cheyenne, and I don't know, the kind of a ministry group got him here. I learned a lot.
Right.
And I just wanted to hear, and we haven't had the lady behind the glass talk yet. So did you have a takeaway, Julie? I wanted you to be there because I wanted, you're part of these podcasts, and I just thought, and I and my wife and you and Corey were there, and there was several, I don't know, there's probably 80 people, 100 people there. There's probably. Right. What's your takeaway?
Well, he started out talking about how persecution is coming and are we ready for it?
Oh, man.
And how our persecution is most likely going to be that cancellation. And of course, being in ministry, we think about those things a lot. And what does that look like? And do we lose our platforms? Will we lose our platform for this podcast? And, all those kinds of things. So, that's definitely something. And we will face persecution even just because of what we believe will be considered that we are hateful. And so all of that premised with, then he talked about fear. And I think that really, kind of two things, I guess, but how he handled fear and, I don't know, share all of his story, but, he really was gripped with fear for probably that first year, if I've got my information right. And that he was so paralyzed by that. He lost 50 pounds. He was dealing with panic attacks. He wasn't able to sleep or anything. And so, then he made a shift and through the Holy Spirit really gave his time as an offering to Christ. And that to me, I guess, as we approach whatever it is we have in our life, how we have a choice in how we interact with that.
Yeah, he talked about that tipping point of persecution, and he can see it because he's seen the pattern before, and he can see it in our country as well. Right. And that was a gut check, just to sit there and listen. It's not like I've never had those thoughts before. We've always had those thoughts, and that you think about it. But I don't know, hearing him talk about it, knowing he went through it, and he explained how it, that here's some levels, and here's similar things that we're also seeing in our country. Well, that was a heart check for me, and I want to talk a little bit more about that faith and that transition. But any takeaways?
He had phrased it a little earlier that day. He said, "Right now in America, being a Christian, it's like swimming against a 1 mile an hour stream." And so there is more difficulty than there once was. But he said God gives us the opportunity to sometimes swim against those 1 mile an hour streams to build up strength because of what is about to come. And so God will get the glory from it. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And I was very thankful for the way in which he helped us to understand that when you're in those circumstances, it doesn't mean that you're not fearful.
Oh, man.
But that God somehow gives you something. And for him, he said it took a while. He is, and you can, as you talk to him, you can see he is rather introverted. He's a very quiet man.
Very
loves the
soft,
Lord. Yeah.
Very, soft-spoken and very, I would say, he's not a strong, bold, he's more passive. It's not like it's like he's really was vulnerable.
Right.
I mean, he's so tender.
That's a good word for it, vulnerability. Because it's not bad to be vulnerable. It's wonderful.
But the courage that he had and what was built in him, there's two things that grip me. He said that over time, that first year was horrible. He said panic attacks, all these things. And he was a mess. He said he was just a mess. But then over time, he said Christ built in him. He said, I could feel Christ building in me. Did he say courage? Something along those lines. It was either resolve. He talked a lot about standing firm and that he could stand firm. He didn't need to. And then there's one line that really gripped me. And if I could say it right, it's like, it wasn't so much that it's not that he didn't have fear, but that he didn't react out of fear. And that was a cool thing because he was very honest. It's like, there was fear. Right. And he always dealt with fear. But he didn't, he said he began to learn how to not respond out of that fear. And he felt like there was a resolve, a steadfastness, a whatever that was being completed in him. And he knew that was something that he didn't put there. That was real. Powerful for me. And it's like, wow, that's the promise of God showing up in the middle of his just horrifying experience.
Talk to me about this, Galen, because oftentimes when we picture people going through trial, we want to get the image of Elijah on Mount Carmel, but we also forget that Elijah was a man that was out in the desert place and just God had to speak to him through a whirlwind and different things, and finally in a still small voice. But there was fear involved.
It's for sure.
Even among the great men that we admire so much in the Scripture.
That is so true. I've experienced this, and I'm not being a great man in the Bible, but I've experienced this of being so bold of preaching God's word, and it's like, man, there was a boldness there. Where did all that come from? And I mean, the next day, Monday, and this happens more often than not, especially if I'm, really hitting on something that is maybe controversial and there'll be fears that I'll deal with. It's like, where's all this coming from? Right. And I'm not even being persecuted. Maybe somebody looked crossways at me and I feel, right. And it's like, wow, the kind of courage and boldness it takes to speak God's, and he said this too, Jesus did this perfectly. And, they took him to the cross.
I wrote a statement down that he made in one of those sessions, but he was talking about he came to a moment where he was able to be thankful.
Yes.
Where he realized that he was being blessed with a new intimacy with Christ. And I thought, that's extraordinary. He knew Christ, but he said God has many friends, but very few lovers. And I thought, wow, that's God giving him the opportunity to get to know him even better. And he referenced this by participating in the fellowship of his sufferings. And so there's a point where in the midst of persecution, and it didn't happen overnight for him, but about 8 months into this persecution, somehow he came into a deeper knowledge of Christ. And what I also loved about that is there was so much humility. He, as he came back to America, he said, there are times where I kind of lose track of it, and then God will remind me of something, and it comes back in. He was being very real. He wanted everybody to understand, this is my own words, but he kept giving me the impression he doesn't want anyone to make him a stained glass saint. One of those 2D images with a halo or anything. That it was just very real, but that God was even more real now than he had ever been before. And I appreciate that because there is something gritty about the Christian life, something that is very both human, but where you see God empower you in a different way.
Yeah.
It was a powerful testimony.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I sat there thinking the whole time, it's like, wow, I would like to think that I would be able to respond, ultimately respond in the way I could definitely relate to the fear.
Right.
I hope that I could relate to the, suffering. And, you hear Paul's suffering and he was rejoicing and all these things in the midst of your struggle and all these things. And, Paul is this giant in the faith and, but in reality, could you do that or could I do that? That's the question I kept asking. It's like, wow, I don't know if this is in our future. I don't know if it's in our lifetime, but it was definitely very real and very, very gripping as I listened to his story.
Another thing that was really powerful for me is he and his wife, Noreen, very much obviously love one another.
Oh, yeah.
And the persecution they went through together, she was only in jail for 13 days. And of course, he was in for 2 years. But she stayed behind in Turkey when many people were telling her, you need to go. Oh, wow. She gave that testimony. People that she deeply respected said, you really need to go. There's nothing that you can do to help him right now. And she said, no, I'm the only person he can see, and he needs me.
So she could go and visit him and see him.
Right.
I don't think I knew that.
I don't know that. I don't know how often, but yeah, there were times where she could. But it made me think of another great hero of the faith, America's first missionary. Adoniram Judson first went to go to India. And then from India, God called him to Burma. Now liberals call it Myanmar, but anyway, to Burma. But he and his wife, Anne, who became known as Anne of Ava, he was thrown into a Burmese prison. And it was devastating. His wife stayed behind to minister to him, and she eventually passed away of sickness. Wow. And yet God did a major work for his kingdom through the persecution that happened in Adoniram Judson's life. Wow. And all of that to say, these are not stories from the past. This is happening with Andrew Brunson.
Yes, right.
These are things that Christians go through today. And he made the point, Christianity is the most persecuted religion on the planet.
In China, in Syria now,
North
Syria,
Korea.
but certainly in China, there's the persecution. It's getting more. During, I don't know, years, not too many years ago, there was crucifixions and images that I saw. They never made it the news, but I was given by people. It's like crucifixions in Syria. It was just so horrific. Yeah. And gripping, you can't unsee some of those things, and you go, oh my gosh, and you go, this is on a level of reality in our world today that is sobering, right to my core.
Well, it comes back to something that you spoke of last year and then a little bit earlier this year, and I appreciated that statement from the Scripture. That if the footmen tire you, what will the horsemen do?
I thought of that all evening. Yeah. It's like this guy is saying that very thing that was on my heart back in October.
When the Lord put that on your heart and then brings this along too, there's a point where when a message is repeated over and over and over again, I think God is trying to get something through to us.
Yeah, it's like, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not sure how I handle the footmen, and I don't know if I can handle the horses, Lord. So you're going to have to do something big.
Yeah.
One thing that I really thought about a lot was his example of how he handled that second year as really an offering to the Lord, and how we can even be preparing ourselves even now in that, and whether or not we're facing persecution, big or small, that we can be. He talked about dancing before the Lord for 5 minutes every day, and how people looked at him and thought he was crazy because what is he doing? A and B, why would he have anything to dance for? And he wrote a song that was that just praise and thanksgiving for the Lord. And I did find it interesting that they allowed him to have his Bible in prison. But thankfully he had that word. But even how important it is that we sow that word into our souls, and that we know the word, and we're memorizing it so that we can be preparing ourselves even now. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah, that's very true.
When he talked about dancing before the Lord, I couldn't help but grin. It was funny.
I know, because you could just picture him just jumping around, dancing, and someone that probably couldn't hear him singing or anything. He's like, what?
Right.
This guy's a
He looked
total
like
idiot.
he lost his mind, and he couldn't dance. He was talking about that a little
I'm
bit.
terrible, yeah.
But he would just jump up and down, and he had to look like an idiot. But if you think about it,
Oh my gosh.
if everything is stripped away,
Yeah.
and what you're left with is God and His Word,
Yeah.
how would you actually act? How would you dwell before His throne? And I think that's one of the things that he counted as a blessing, that God gave him the opportunity to have everything stripped away. And all he had was the presence of Christ and the fellowship of His suffering. And I would love to think that I could actually act that way now. But there are so many different, I don't want to look embarrassed in front of anybody.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go
Raise
jump
my
up
hands,
and down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm one of these worshipers. And,
Right.
if I'm getting to hear,
Keep
that's
it right here.
what do they call that? The holding the TV or something like that.
Right.
It's like, I don't,
Yeah,
it's
Tim,
like,
what
I don't
you
know. I'm
need?
just from Kansas. This is pretty high right now.
Right. Change the light bulb.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we're pretty pathetic. But anyway, another thing he did, he talked about the assignment, and he actually told the Lord, he said, Lord, I don't remember what word he used, but I don't want any more of this assignment. I don't want the reward of this assignment. I don't want any. That's
He was done.
He was done, and I don't know what year that was exactly. Maybe he said, but then God started building this in him, and then of course this dancing was later, and of just being rejoicing because he could feel Christ building in him a strength and courage. And I just thought that. And then he said, Lord, I want to change that. I want to take any and every assignment that you've got for me. And I think that's so important. I think for anybody in ministry, I don't know how many times that's true of any of us, that, you go, oh my gosh, you can't go another day or whatever. I don't want another assignment. I don't want, I'm just kind of, cruising or whatever. And I just want to kind of reach for the bench and whatever. His challenge of saying, I don't want to miss an assignment was really good. And we'd have missed this joy that we have, had he missed, checked out on that assignment.
I don't know if you guys thought of this, but when you read the book of Job, about Job chapter 2, he's, Lord, I wish I was never born. I wish I would have never been conceived in my mother's womb, or if I had, I would have just passed then. Lord, I don't want to go through this.
Yeah.
So that is a normal reaction. Again, even in the book of Job, just like you would with Andrew Brunson, you don't get that 2D version, stained glass saint. The way we respond to challenges is first and foremost human. And that is where then God empowers us with His Spirit beyond the natural. It becomes supernatural.
Yeah.
And that really is where God gives power. Yeah. And that's a good thing to remember too, because we build a lot of times these false ideas in our own head that, well, I would handle it better than someone else.
Oh my gosh.
No.
It's like, unless the Lord, shows up, we're toast. There's
exactly.
no way. The strength of his character, not really the strength of his voice, because it wasn't a strong, it was very vulnerable, very passive in a sense, but there was a strength that you knew that came from Christ in this whole thing. Yeah. But he also said something that you alluded to earlier, and maybe it was before we started broadcasting, but this whole idea that suffering may not strengthen the church. It could eliminate it. That was a real, very real statement, because I think, I've been saying for the last hunk of time, I feel like a lot of the messages, probably in the last year, have been really messages to the remnant. Mm-hmm. A lot of times my messages are really tailored to the seeker. Sometimes they're more tailored to the discipleship mode. Because I just have looked back, and I don't think this has been intentional. It's just like, wow, it seems like most of what I've been preaching, or has been preaching here at Cheyenne Hills, is to the remnant. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing, but it's like, I really do wonder that question of how would we handle a persecution? Right. And, you think, okay, it's always going to be stronger. It might be, but it might, to his point, it might wipe you out.
Right.
It was humbling.
He made the statement in one of his meetings that people who want persecution are people who have never probably experienced persecution. Oh my gosh, yeah. That God will lead you into persecution at times and will also give you strength to endure it. But it's not something that people once they actually realize what it is, long for. And he also pointed out that in times past, where great Christian epicenters now often have very few Christians. So God's church will go on, and it will be strong, always getting stronger. And yet at the same time, sometimes it means like in Syria or in Turkey or many of the places where the gospel was first preached, there is no gospel witness anymore.
It's gone. It's in ruins. It's in ruins. That's it.
And I think the point that we get is it's worth standing up for.
Yeah.
And we stand for truth. And even, just instead of allowing the persecution to wash against us and, shuffle us off downstream like flotsam, that we have to stand. Yeah. And so that comes back to the Christian message of taking a stand and knowing why you're standing and being willing to stand regardless of the personal consequence.
Yeah.
Well, and he talked about having that heavenly perspective and keeping our eyes focused on that, and how much,
good.
I mean, I would like to say easier it would be to face persecution. It's still going to be fearful. It's still going to be difficult. Right. But when we have that heavenly perspective, it's much easier to take.
Yeah,
that's good.
That was a sustaining. I think that's a good place for us to land on this particular. But I'm so thankful that you invited me to the Andrew Brunson, Pastor Andrew Brunson. What a special man, special wife that he has, and an amazing story. And I think we all have benefited. I know we came home, talked about it at the staff meeting, and it really was impactful. And hopefully it'll cause us, as we've been saying for a long time, to be strong and very courageous. God bless you all. Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast that is a video version now. So thanks for joining.
To find out more about Andrew Brunson, you can check out his memoir titled God's Hostage, a true story of persecution, imprisonment, and perseverance about his time in a Turkish prison.